Beneath the endless whisper of the Aegean, where the horizon bleeds into the breath of gods, there once stood a temple of ivory and salt. The sea stretched outward like a mirror of glass, and the wind carried prayers that dissolved into foam. Within that silence, before her name became a warning, before serpents crowned her sorrow, there was only beauty, radiant, untouchable, and achingly human. Her name was Medusa, and the gods turned their gaze toward her, not for devotion, but for desire. The temple was hers to tend, a sanctuary of Athena, gleaming with marble columns that held the sky. Each morning, as dawn spilled through the open roof, Medusa cleansed the altar with water drawn from the sea. She moved like light bending through mist, her footsteps soft against the cold stone. The others said Athena favored her, that her hands restored purity to sacred places, that her eyes mirrored divine order. But among mortals, purity is fragile, and among gods, favor is fleeting. She was mortal, her veins pulsing with warmth, her heart alive with unguarded dreams. Yet she bore a beauty so precise, so complete, that even immortals forgot themselves in her presence. The sea winds clung to her skin, the sun lingered too long upon her hair, turning it into threads of molten gold. And when she laughed, the air itself trembled, as if creation remembered its first joy. Medusa did not yet know that beauty can be a curse disguised as grace. She only knew that wherever she walked, silence followed, a silence not of reverence, but of hunger. Fishermen who glimpsed her from the cliffs whispered her name into their nets. Nobles sent offerings to the temple, not for Athena, but for the priestess who outshone her goddess. Rumors drifted like incense that the gods themselves looked upon her with envy. Yet her devotion was sincere. She believed in Athena's wisdom and justice. She believed that to serve the goddess was to belong to something pure and eternal. Her prayers were long and sincere. She would kneel before the statue each night, lips moving softly, her hair falling like spilled sunlight. She prayed not for power, nor for beauty, but for clarity, to understand her place in a world ruled by unseen hands. And the goddess listened for a time. The temple walls bore scenes of triumph, Athena's spear breaking monsters, her shield gleaming like dawn. But no carving showed the fragility of women who served her, how their flesh drew the hunger of gods, how their purity could ignite divine wrath. Medusa could not yet see that she walked upon a thread spun by jealous hands. At night, when the sea turned dark and the air thickened with salt, she would wander to the cliffs. The waves below roared like beasts, swallowing moonlight in their teeth. She stood barefoot, her robes whipping in the wind, listening, not to the sea, but to something deeper, something older, fragrant with storm and desire. Sometimes she dreamt of eyes the color of the deep, eyes that did not judge but devoured. In her sleep, she felt the brush of water against her skin, like a lover's hand tracing the curve of her neck. The sea itself seemed to know her name. When she awoke, her heart beat too fast for the confines of a temple. The priests spoke of omens. They said the waves had grown restless, that Poseidon's trident stirred the depths. They warned that mortals too fair often draw ruin. Medusa listened, smiling faintly, unaware that ruin already walked in her shadow. For now her world was still golden. The temple's corridors glowed with oil lamps that painted her face in honeyed light. She would gaze upon her reflection in the ceremonial basin, not in vanity, but in wonder, as though she were seeing someone else. The water shimmered with her image, lips curved in quiet grace, eyes wide with longing she could not name. She did not yet understand how beauty isolates, how the more perfect the face, the less human the world allows it to be. The gods, too, were watching. Athena regarded her with cool affection, as one admires a flawless weapon. Poseidon, lord of storms, felt his pulse quicken each time the sea carried her scent. Even Aphrodite paused, her jealousy sweet and bitter upon her tongue. Among the immortals, whispers began, that a mortal woman's beauty had become too divine, and that such balance could not last. But Medusa did not hear them. She walked through her days with the ease of one untouched by tragedy. When she tended to wounded birds, she whispered gentle things. When she cleaned the temple floors, she hummed hymns that softened the marble's cold heart. She believed holiness was a shield against envy, that her faith would protect her. The sea disagreed. Each dawn it crept closer to the temple, waves licking the sacred stones as if claiming her. Each night she dreamt of thunder beneath the waves and a voice murmuring her name in a rhythm older than speech. The scent of salt clung to her like perfume. When she washed the altar, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation she could not name. Villagers began to avoid the temple. They said the air shimmered around her, that gulls fell silent when she passed, that even the wind paused to listen. To mortals, such signs were ominous. To the gods, they were the opening notes of a song about to be rewritten. There were moments when she sensed it, the weight of unseen eyes, the pulse of something divine moving just beyond reach. She felt beauty not as pride, but as burden, a force that separated her from the world, isolating her in her own reflection. She prayed harder then, whispering to Athena for guidance, for balance, for calm. Yet the goddess remained silent, waiting to see which way her priestess would fall. One evening, as the sun melted into the sea, Medusa lingered before the statue of her goddess. The air was still, the light through the columns was soft and golden, touching her skin like farewell. She pressed her palm to the cool marble and whispered, "If beauty is my sin, let me serve through it. Let my devotion cleanse what it tempts." Her voice trembled, and in that tremor the gods found an opening. For every prayer uttered in innocence, The divine world listens with motives of its own. Poseidon, stirred by that fragile voice, rose from the deep. Athena, hearing it, turned her gaze away, not in mercy, but in foreknowledge. Fate had already begun its descent. Medusa's story was not yet tragedy. It was still a hymn, one woven with golden threads and soft sighs. But beneath that harmony, the first discord had been struck. The sea would come for her. The goddess would look upon her with cold eyes, and beauty, once her blessing, would soon reveal its fangs. That night, the moon rose heavy and full. The waves crashed against the rocks, echoing like a heartbeat beneath the stars. Medusa stood at the cliff's edge, her hair glinting silver in the moonlight, her eyes lost in the horizon. Somewhere beyond the foam and darkness, something stirred, vast, watching, patient. And though she could not name it, she felt it waiting for her. A story older than worship had chosen its vessel. Her beauty, her faith, her unspoken longing, all would become the melody of her undoing. And as the sea wind wrapped around her like a lover's sigh, Medusa closed her eyes and smiled, unaware that the gods had already begun to write her lament in the stars.
Morning in the temple began with the rhythm of breath and the murmur of waves below. The sea brushed the cliffs like a heartbeat, echoing through the marble halls where Medusa worked. She knelt before the altar, fingers trailing over pearl dust, sunlight flowing over her shoulders. The scent of oil and salt filled the air. To the other priestesses, she seemed serene, almost divine, yet within her calm lived something alive and vivid, laughter that brightened the solemn temple, warmth that softened marble silence. Medusa had once been a child of the coast, unknown, unnoticed, until Athena's gaze found her. The goddess had seen her at a seaside shrine, a small girl offering shells to the wind. From that moment, her fate was sealed. The temple became her home, Athena her purpose. Every prayer, every gesture was a quiet vow. When she polished the armor of her goddess, she whispered blessings as if touching wisdom itself. To her, Athena was more than marble. She was presence, unseen but near, a companion of thought and silence. Sometimes, Medusa imagined the statue's eyes alive with hidden warmth. She would smile and murmur, "For you, my guardian." In her devotion was affection, almost sisterly. Athena, distant in Olympus, watched her priestess with a blend of admiration and unease. The goddess valued clarity, restraint, perfection born of intellect. Yet in Medusa's devotion, she sensed something dangerous, beauty that existed without divine will. It was mortal beauty, breathing and unpredictable, radiant without command. Athena found herself drawn to it and disturbed by it in equal measure. Medusa's beauty was not just appearance, it was the harmony of motion, the quiet way her voice filled the air, the warmth that seemed to invite the world closer. Men came to the temple with offerings, but their prayers faltered when they saw her. She received them with grace, her tone calm, her eyes kind, never encouraging. Still, they left changed, awed, haunted, as though they had glimpsed something forbidden. Far beneath the waves, another watched. Poseidon, lord of the deep, had long ruled the vast waters without desire for mortal things. Yet word of the temple by the sea reached even him, of a woman whose beauty rivaled sunlight on water. At first he ignored it. Mortal loveliness was a momentary flame, soon gone. But one evening he rose near the surface and heard her laughter carried by the wind. It was low and full of life, stirring a memory of the world's first tides. He came closer. From the shadow of the sea, he saw her standing on the cliffs, robes fluttering, hair glimmering in twilight. She looked out over the horizon, unafraid, her presence both mortal and sacred. He felt a pull, not of conquest, but of recognition, as if something within her answered the depths of his own being. He lingered unseen. The air trembled between them, though she could not yet see him. When he finally withdrew, the ocean itself seemed reluctant to release him. That night, Medusa dreamed of waves that whispered her name, of eyes vast as the deep, watching her with silent hunger. She awoke breathless, tasting salt on her lips, the echo of a voice she had never heard. The next morning her prayers faltered. She spilled water upon the altar, her hands trembling. The surface of the bowl shimmered strangely, though no wind stirred. The other priestesses noticed nothing, but Athena did. From her celestial throne, the goddess's gaze darkened. She felt the sea's pull gathering around her devotee, and pride tightened in her chest. Medusa was hers, her creation, her reflection of mortal perfection. Yet Athena's wisdom could not silence the shadow of envy creeping within her. She told herself she guarded the mortal out of care, but what she feared most was to lose the one soul who worshipped her, not from fear, but from love. Medusa sensed only confusion. The sea, once gentle, now felt alive beneath her feet. When she walked along the cliffs, the waves rose higher, the wind coiling around her ankles. Sometimes she would close her eyes and feel the air brush her skin like unseen fingers. It frightened her, yet drew her closer. One evening she dared to speak softly to the statue. "My goddess, if this is temptation, grant me strength." The marble gave no answer, only silence, cold and unyielding. That silence wounded her more than any words could. For the first time, she felt alone in her faith. The storm came days later. The horizon darkened, thunder blooming across the sea. The temple's torches flickered as priestesses gathered the offerings inside, but Medusa lingered at the doorway. The scent of rain filled her lungs. She watched the water churn, restless, alive. Then, through the mist and lightning, she sensed it, presence, vast and ancient. The sea itself seemed to breathe. She stepped into the rain, barefoot on the stone, her robe clinging to her skin. Each drop felt like a touch, each gust of wind like a whisper calling her name. Poseidon watched from the depths, torn by his own power. He had taken mortal lovers before, but none like her, none who stood unbowed before a storm. She did not pray,
did not plead. She faced the sea as an equal, her gaze steady, her fear transformed into wonder. He rose closer, his voice a current, his words not sound, but sensation. Medusa. She heard it inside her blood. Her body shivered, not from cold, but from recognition. She did not see him, yet she felt his gaze, immense and tender. In that instant, the distance between God and mortal dissolved into something unspoken, a yearning that defied both faith and law. The wind wrapped around her like an embrace. Lightning illuminated her silhouette, fragile yet defiant. For a heartbeat, she felt suspended between heaven and sea, between two powers that would one day destroy her. Then it ended. The thunder faded, the rain softened, the waves withdrew. She opened her eyes to calm water, to silence so deep it hurt. Behind her, the temple loomed, marble, eternal, watching. She turned toward it, breath trembling, unsure if she had dreamed or sinned. Athena's statue gleamed faintly in the dim light, its eyes unreadable. The goddess had seen. And though no words were spoken, something in that silent gaze changed. It was not anger yet, not fully. It was possession wounded, reverence cracked. Athena's pride, vast as her wisdom, began to harden. She told herself the mortal would forget, that temptation would fade like a tide. The deep inside, she knew the sea never forgets what it touches. The Medusa returned to her duties, but the air around her had shifted. The other priestesses whispered of her glow, the strange calm that followed her steps. When she touched water, it rippled without cause. When she prayed, the flame of the altar bent toward her. She did not understand what she carried, a trace of the sea's longing hidden beneath her skin. The gods above watched. Athena's silence deepened, Poseidon's desire sharpened, and between them stood Medusa, fragile, radiant, unaware that her devotion, her beauty, and her heart had already become the battlefield of immortals. She still smiled at dawn, still sang as she swept the marble steps, but something in her song had changed. It carried the sorrow of tides and the sweetness of danger. Even the wind listened, even the sea seemed to wait. And in that stillness, destiny began to coil, silent as a serpent in the dark, patient, inevitable. The days that followed blurred between prayer and trembling. The air around the temple grew heavy, charged with unseen currents. The sea no longer hummed gently beneath the cliffs. It whispered, calling her name in tones both tender and terrifying. Medusa tried to silence it. She prayed longer, bowed lower, washed the altar until her fingers ached. Yet every offering she made seemed to ripple with defiance, as if the sea mocked her devotion. When she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of blue light under her eyelids. his eyes, vast and merciless, watching her still. At night she dreamed of hands made of water tracing her skin, of a voice whispering promises she could not repeat. She would wake with the taste of salt on her lips, heart beating against the silence of the temple. In the darkness, the statue of Athena loomed, lit by a single flickering flame. The goddess's eyes seemed alive, filled with warning. Medusa would whisper, "Forgive me." Yet even as she said it, a quiet part of her heart refused. For what had she done but feel? What sin lay in answering the pull of the sea? Her prayers became questions, her devotion confusion, and in that confusion desire began to grow, a flame that warmed and burned at once. Poseidon did not come at once. He lingered in the deep, patient as the tide, waiting for her to surrender, not in fear, but in longing. When he rose again, the moon hung low and red, its reflection breaking over the waves. Medusa stood alone by the shore, sleepless, drawn by a force she could no longer deny. The night air clung to her like silk, cool and trembling. When she stepped into the surf, the water greeted her like a lover, curling around her ankles. "Why do you call to me?" she whispered to the sea. "What do you want of me?" And the ocean answered, not in words, but in presence. From the mist a figure emerged, as tall as the horizon, his skin shimmering with light drawn from the depths. His hair flowed like ink across his shoulders, his eyes burning with the blue of the storm. Poseidon.
Medusa froze, breath caught between awe and terror. Her heart told her to kneel, her body refused. He smiled, not cruelly, but with the gentleness of something vast restraining itself. "You fear me," he said, "yet you came." His voice was not thunder, it was tide, patient, surrounding, inevitable. "I am sworn to Athena," she whispered. "And yet," he said, stepping closer, "you stand in my water." The waves lapped higher. The scent of salt thickened in the air. She tried to speak, but her throat trembled. He reached out, his hand stopping just short of her cheek, as if asking for permission. Medusa did not move away. The wind lifted her hair, and for a moment the world seemed to hold still. Marble cliffs, restless sea, the vast indifference of the gods above. She felt the pull of him, not as domination, but as recognition. His presence filled the air, heavy with danger, heavy with need. When his fingers finally touched her skin, the world changed. It was not gentle, it was not cruel. It was the breaking of two worlds colliding, divine and mortal, faith and hunger. The air filled with light, the sea roared, the temple torches flared. She felt his power, endless and suffocating, yet within it
a strange tenderness, the touch of a god who longed to be understood. Her body trembled, her heart in chaos. She wanted to run, but something deeper wanted to stay. The waves wrapped around her, lifting her from the stone. His voice filled her mind, a melody of sorrow and desire, of eternity craving what dies too soon. In that moment, she was not priestess nor mortal. She was the storm itself. When it ended, the sea fell silent. She stood in the surf, hair plastered to her skin, the taste of lightning in her breath. He was gone, vanishing with the retreating tide, but his presence lingered, a promise, a curse, a memory. Behind her, the temple door groaned open. Athena stood within, silent as the moon. The torches flickered against her armor, casting fractured gold across her face. Her eyes were not rage yet, not yet, but disbelief, a sharp wound carved through divinity itself. Medusa turned, heart racing, the words forming like broken glass in her mouth. "My goddess,
Silence. The voice was soft, yet it struck like thunder. Athena stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the scene. The wet marble, the trembling air, the scent of salt that clung to Medusa's skin. "You have defiled my temple." Medusa fell to her knees. "I did not mean you let him touch you." Her tone wavered not with pity, but with betrayal. She saw not violation, not pain, only rebellion. The goddess's pride burned hotter than her wisdom. "I was faithful," Medusa pleaded. "I tried to resist. I prayed." "You prayed with your lips while your heart betrayed me." Athena's hand trembled, the air thick with her fury. "You whom I raised from nothing, you whom I called pure." Medusa's tears fell to the stone. "He is a god. What could I do?" "You could have remembered who you were," Athena hissed. "You could have remembered me." The temple walls shook. Lightning split the sky. The sea outside raged as if echoing their voices. Athena's wrath was not cold now. It was molten, human, alive with jealousy she would never name. Medusa lifted her face, eyes shining through tears. "I loved you. More than him, more than the sea. I served you. Then you should have loved as I commanded." The words cut deeper than any curse. For a heartbeat, silence fell, the kind that comes before ruin. The torches flickered. The scent of ozone filled the air. Athena's eyes blazed white. "You will not seduce the world as you seduced him. Your beauty will be your burden."
Medusa gasped as the goddess raised her hand. Light poured from her fingers, not warm, but searing, ancient as the birth of reason. The marble underfoot cracked, the air shrieked. Pain tore through her, fire, ice, wind, her body twisting under divine will. Her hair writhed, alive with something she could not comprehend. She tried to cry out, but the sound was swallowed by thunder. When it was done, silence returned. Medusa lay trembling, her breath ragged, the stone cold beneath her. She reached for her hair, it hissed. Serpents coiled where silk once flowed, their scales glistened in the torchlight, alive, breathing, watching.
She screamed, but the echo turned to stone. The pillars, the statues, even the air froze in stillness. Athena stepped back, her face pale, her own creation too terrible to behold. "This," the goddess said quietly, "is what purity defiled becomes." And she turned away. Medusa crawled toward her reflection in the marble floor, her breath trembling. Where her beauty once lived, she saw something monstrous. Yet within those golden eyes was sorrow too deep for words. She reached out, but the reflection cracked. The temple that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a tomb. The sea moaned beyond the cliffs, mourning her, calling still. Athena vanished into the heavens, her pride sealed behind silence. Poseidon sank into the depths, guiltless and distant. And Medusa, once priestess, once beloved, was left alone among the ruins of devotion. The wind entered through the broken doorway, carrying the scent of the ocean. She lifted her head, the serpents whispering around her like lost prayers. Tears rolled down her cheeks, turning to stone as they fell. She no longer prayed, she no longer wept. Only the sea answered her now. The temple lay in ruins of silence. The torches had died, leaving only the silver wash of moonlight spilling through the shattered roof. Medusa lay motionless amid fragments of marble, her breath trembling in the cold. The scent of salt and smoke clung to her skin. Her fingers pressed against the floor, searching for the warmth that had once guided her prayers, but even the stone recoiled. When she lifted her head, the serpents stirred. They moved with eerie grace, not as curses, but as extensions of her pulse, each motion echoing the rhythm of her grief. Their scales shimmered faintly in the dim light, reflecting fragments of who she had been. They hissed softly, not in malice, but in lament, their voices like mourning harps, weaving around her trembling breath. She tried to touch her hair, to gather it back as before, but they turned toward her hand, sensing her sorrow. Their tongues flickered against her fingers, curious, gentle. The contact sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of recognition. They were hers, her pain made flesh, her sorrow given form. Her reflection lay broken on the marble floor, scattered into 1,000 glittering shards. In each fragment she saw a different version of herself, the maiden she had been, the priestess she had lost, the creature she was becoming. She reached toward one sliver, her hand trembling, but the image wavered and changed. Her golden eyes glowed like molten amber, and for the first time, she did not look away. A strange calm began to bloom within her chest, rising through the ache, through the ruin. The serpents quieted, as though they too felt it, a vibration deep beneath the skin, neither life nor death, but something greater. The air thickened around her, heavy with unseen presence. The world seemed to lean closer, waiting. She lifted herself slowly from the ground. The moonlight caught her body, revealing the delicate transformation that had already begun. Her skin, once soft as petals, shimmered faintly, the smoothness of marble meeting the shimmer of scales. They caught the light like silver dust, spreading down her arms in fine, intricate patterns. Each breath she took released a faint mist, cool and glimmering, like the sea's exhale caught in her lungs. She looked up toward the broken roof and whispered, "Athena." No answer came, only the hum of distant thunder and the sighing of the sea below. Her voice deepened with the weight of something ancient. She murmured, "You have taken my beauty, but you have not taken me."
The air shifted, and the serpents rose, coiling gently, their scales whispering against one another. They brushed her shoulders like a shawl of living silk, moving in rhythm with her heartbeat. What had begun as torment became symmetry, her agony reshaped into power. She felt it within her blood, the merging of what was mortal and what was divine. Her body no longer belonged to one realm. The warmth of flesh mingled with the chill of stone. The pulse of her heart slowed until it matched the eternal rhythm of the earth itself. Her senses awakened in strange new ways. She could feel the veins of water moving through the cliffs beneath the temple, hear the whisper of insects beyond the ruin, sense the pulse of the ocean far below. The world opened to her in layers, as if she were seeing through the eyes of something older than gods. And yet, beneath the rising power, emotion bloomed, not rage, but sorrow so profound it became sacred. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. They struck the floor and turned instantly to stone. From the sea came a low rumble, as if the waves mourned with her. The air carried the scent of brine, and a faint wind entered the shattered temple, curling around her body like an embrace. Poseidon's voice rose faintly from the depths, a whisper carried by the tide. "Forgive me." She heard it not with her ears, but within her soul. For a heartbeat, her eyes softened, and the serpent stilled. But forgiveness was a language no longer meant for her. That life, the girl who prayed, who loved, who hoped, had already dissolved into myth. The metamorphosis deepened, her veins cooled, her breath steadied, her body growing impossibly still. Yet in that stillness she found an ecstasy beyond pain, the quiet rapture of transformation, of surrender to what she was becoming. The scales spread across her back, delicate as lace, each one a memory sealed in shimmer. The laughter she once shared, the prayers she once whispered, the warmth of a sun she would never feel again. They were her history and her armor both. Her eyes lifted toward the heavens, twin fires gleaming in the shadows. The moonlight seemed to bend toward her, pulled by her gravity. The serpents, sensing her awakening, began to move in slow, hypnotic waves, their tongues flickering in unison. They were not her curse, they were her chorus. When she inhaled, the air trembled. When she exhaled, it shimmered. Her breath itself carried power, unseen but felt, a softness that could turn to stone. The temple's broken statues began to hum, the marble faintly vibrating. One by one, they cracked, not from decay, but from awe. The stone could not bear the living divinity that now walked among its remains.
Medusa's body arched as if drawn upward by unseen hands. Pain flared once more, a final searing pulse that tore through every vein, every memory. Her mouth opened in a cry that became music, a note so pure it seemed to split the air. And then silence. The transformation was complete. She stood tall, radiant, her shadows stretching long across the shattered temple floor. The serpents rested against her shoulders like a crown of living flame. Her eyes glowed with impossible depth, gold-rimmed with green, like the ocean reflecting dawn. She touched her own face, tracing the cold, perfect line of her jaw. The skin beneath her fingers felt smooth as glass, neither flesh nor stone. She was something in between, untouchable, eternal. A faint smile touched her lips, sorrowful yet serene. You made me a monster, and in doing so, you made me a god. The wind carried her words out to the sea. The ocean responded with a swell of waves, reverent, mourning. The moon sank lower, its light spilling across her like benediction. The world for a moment seemed to kneel. She turned her gaze toward the distant cliffs, where she had once laughed beneath the sun, where she had believed herself loved. Now the world trembled beneath her eyes. The marble fragments around her hardened to stone at her feet, the air itself slowing in reverence. Her body no longer felt burdened by grief, only transformed by it. Her sorrow was now power, her beauty a weapon of stillness, and in the quiet that followed, she felt no fear. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, her lungs filling with the scent of salt and earth. The serpents moved slowly, their scales brushing her skin in soft harmony. She could feel their warmth, her warmth, the life within them echoing her own pulse. They were not beasts, but memories reborn. In their hiss, she heard whispers of all she had lost, the laughter of the temple, the voice of Athena, the sigh of Poseidon beneath the sea. And yet there was peace, a peace carved from the ruin of love. The night deepened, the stars gathering like eyes across the sky. Medusa stood among the remnants of her sanctity, her new form gleaming in moonlight. No longer a woman, no longer prey, but legend. The sea continued to sing below her cliffs, a song both mourning and adoration. And as she listened, she realized that she no longer belonged to gods or men. She had become the silence between their worlds, the breath held between creation and curse. And in that silence, Medusa was reborn.
The world had shifted. The temple, once a sanctuary of worship, now stood as a tomb of memory. Marble pillars lay fractured, and the floor glimmered with the frozen echoes of her transformation. Beyond the Rowan, the world itself seemed to tremble at her presence. Travelers came from distant hills, drawn by whispers of a woman unlike any mortal, a priestess touched by divinity and desecration alike. They approached with awe and fear, peering through cliffs and forests, speaking her name in hushed tones, Medusa, Wherever they lingered, the air thickened, the stones quivered, and those who dared look too closely found themselves forever still. Her gaze, now a force beyond flesh, had become the instrument of consequence. Mortals who sought her with curiosity or lust were caught in the silent snare of her eyes. They froze mid-step, their forms crystallized in fear and fascination. Yet Medusa, standing among the cliffs, felt no malice. She merely existed, untouchable, complete, radiant with sorrow transformed into power. Her solitude was profound. No worshippers knelt before her, no prayers carried into her ears. The songs of mortals faded like echoes into the cliffs and waves below. She was a goddess without altars, a myth without hymn, a force moving through the world, unseen yet unforgettable. And in this isolation, she discovered a strange serenity. Each day, she wandered the ruins and cliffs beyond, her serpents coiling gently around her shoulders, brushing against her skin like living silk. They responded to her moods, the tremor of her heartbeat, the whisper of her breath. She spoke to them softly, and they whispered back, companions born of sorrow and strength. She touched the sea, and it shifted with her presence, tides rising and falling with her rhythm. She walked through forests, and the wind seemed to pause, carrying her scent across mountains and valleys. Her voice, once a prayer or plea, had become a statement of being. She could call the waves, and they would bend to her will. She could move through stone and shadow alike, and even in stillness, the world leaned toward her. Yet power came at a price. The beauty that had once drawn men to devotion now drew them to ruin. Legends grew from fear and awe, whispered by those who survived encounters with her gaze. Her solitude deepened, compounded by the very awe that honored her. She was no longer a mortal among mortals, no longer a priestess among the devoted. She was a presence, defining the line between fear and fascination, beauty and terror.
At times she stood at cliff edges, watching the sea stretch beyond the horizon. Her serpents coiled higher, tongues flickering with life, and she felt the weight of her existence settle into her chest. She was alive, immortal, and alone. Yet within that aloneness, she found an echo of freedom. She remembered Athena's gaze, cold and precise, the judgment that had shattered her world. She remembered Poseidon's touch, vast and insistent, the temptation of power that could not be claimed without cost. And she understood that neither god nor mortal could define her. She belonged only to herself, a truth forged in agony, polished in sorrow, sharpened in the crucible of divine wrath. The cliffs became her sanctuary. The wind, the rain, the shadows across stone were her companions. She would walk among them at twilight, serpents brushing against the columns of fractured marble, tracing the edges of what once was sacred. She spoke softly, words that no one else could hear, carrying the weight of grief transformed into wisdom. "See me," she whispered to the world, "and understand what it costs to live between gods and mortals." The words were not a plea, they were a declaration. Her voice carried across cliffs and valleys,
rivers and forests, leaving an imprint of beauty and terror intertwined. Those who dared witness her too closely were rendered still, frozen in awe. Her isolation gave rise to reflection. She considered the life she had lost, the girl who had danced in temple halls, the priestess who had once knelt before marble and flame. And she mourned, not with tears, but with reverent acknowledgement. Each memory became a pillar of strength around her heart. She was fragile no longer. She was untouchable. Yet the sorrow remained, sacred, a reminder of what she had loved and lost. The ocean carried her grief outward across the lands. Sailors spoke of seeing her hair glinting under moonlight, of shadows moving among the waves, of silence that pressed upon the soul. And so her myth began to take shape, whispered in fear and fascination. Even in exile she moved with grace. Her serpents followed her like living extensions of her own emotion, brushing against her skin, curling with each breath. Each movement was poetry, each glance a story. Travelers who glimpsed her from afar felt hearts tighten, though they could not comprehend why. They saw not a monster, but a force, tragic and radiant, beautiful beyond mortal understanding.
Time passed, yet she remained unchanged, eternal in her vigilance. The cliffs became as familiar as the lines of her own body. The wind carried the memory of her laughter from ages past, now tempered into a resonance of authority and sorrow. Birds circled overhead, silent in her presence, while the waves seemed to bow to her form. She spoke rarely, and when she did, it was not for instruction, but for assertion. The words carried weight, deliberate, not for mortal ears, but for the world itself. She had become an echo of what had been lost, and a herald of what could not be undone. Her voice, soft and deliberate, flowed across stone and water, bending perception with subtle insistence. She was not victim, she was power. And yet, even in mastery, she mourned the price. Love had been her weakness, devotion her betrayal. But now, love and devotion transformed into sovereignty. She could no longer kneel before the gods. She could no longer hope for their mercy. She existed beyond them, above them, a legend born from grief and desire, punishment and transformation. No mortal worshipped her. No temple bore her name. Across Greece, stories spread, carried on wind and wave. The priestess who became stone and serpents, the maiden who defied gods, the woman whose gaze held eternity. Each telling added weight to her myth, shaping her presence into legend. Medusa, standing alone on the cliffs, finally understood her dominion. She was not meant for companionship or worship. She was meant for reverence, for caution, for awe. She was a force that the world could not contain, a being born from grief and desire, punishment and transformation.
She raised her eyes to the horizon, where the moon kissed the ocean, and her voice, soft and deliberate, rose over the waves. See me, fear me, remember me. It was not plea, cry, or lament. It was a statement of existence, a proclamation of sovereignty. The wind carried it outward, over mountains and rivers, touching the hearts of those far and near, leaving an imprint of beauty and terror intertwined. The world shifted again, acknowledging her. The waves rose and fell with her breath. The cliffs echoed her presence. The temple, though broken, remained sacred in memory. And Medusa, no longer mortal, no longer simply beautiful, stood as a force, a legend, a power that would endure beyond time. She was alone, yet whole. She was feared, yet revered. She was Medusa, sorrow incarnate, beauty transformed, exile turned dominion. And in her solitude there was peace.
The cliffs had grown quiet. Even the restless sea seemed to pause, listening. Medusa stood at the edge, her serpents coiled around her shoulders, tongues flickering with subtle life. The wind whispered through the broken temple ruins, carrying salt and the faint scent of ancient stone. In that stillness, she breathed deeply, not in fear or longing, but in recognition of herself, the world, and what it had cost to become legend. She remembered the girl she once was, fingers wet with ocean spray, hair damp beneath the sun, eyes bright with innocent devotion. The temple had been a haven, marble corridors echoing with laughter and prayer. She had knelt before Athena with hope, with pride, believing the world could be measured, controlled, and known. Yet fate carried her beyond mortal comprehension. Medusa's lips curved faintly. She had loved and been betrayed, desired and punished, touched by divinity and abandoned to consequence. Her beauty, once celebrated, had become the axis upon which her suffering and power revolved. Every glance, every step, every whispered legend traced her story, hers alone, yet felt by the world as both fascination and fear. She thought of Athena, whose pride had carved her path with light and cruelty. The worship once sacred had been turned against her, the judgment of the divine shaping the mortal into myth. Yet even in wrath she understood the goddess's gaze, neither hatred nor love, but recognition of power, of singularity, of something beyond control. Poseidon lingered in memory. The tide of desire had been not conquest, but recognition, of longing shared between immortal and mortal, human and divine. She had trembled beneath his touch, yet she had awakened. The waves beneath her cliffs murmured in memory of that awakening, echoing an ecstasy that could neither be taken nor given, only felt. In reflection, she understood herself anew. She was neither victim nor villain, neither mortal nor god. She existed in the space between, where sorrow became power, desire became wisdom, and beauty became quiet dominion.
Her serpents, hissing softly, were not instruments of malice, but witnesses, living symbols of her transformation, coiling with the rhythm of her breath, echoing grief and grace, loss and sovereignty. Her gaze swept across cliffs and waves. The world had learned to fear her, respect her, mythologize her. Men whispered her name in awe. Sailors diverted their courses. Poets wrote of her. Children were warned. And still, she remained solitary, a goddess without worship, a creature without companion, a force unclaimed yet wholly alive. Sin visited her mind. Was it sin to desire what was forbidden? To long for what gods and mortals alike would deny? She could not say. Sin and virtue had been tangled like threads, and Athena's wrath had unraveled them. Yet she discovered something greater, understanding. Sin was mortal in origin, consequence eternal. Desire was neither sin nor virtue, but existence itself. Power revealed its truth, a quiet weight, invisible yet undeniable. It could not be asked for nor taken, born in suffering, forged in moments of absolute choice, tempered by solitude. Medusa had been powerless once. Now she was sovereign. Her gaze shaped worlds. Yet even as stones multiplied beneath her eyes, she felt no joy in destruction, only solemn acknowledgement of consequence. Love, perhaps, was the most elusive. Could the cursed still love? Could she, transformed into legend and sorrow, still reach toward warmth, toward touch? She closed her eyes, letting the wind curl through her serpents, and felt that yes, in memory, in awareness, in the rhythm of the world, she could love. But love was no longer a call to another. It was recognition of existence, reverence for life, for the beauty that lingered even in exile. She moved along the cliff's edge, serpents swaying with her steps. Each step pressed the memory of her past into the earth, carving a path into eternity. She had become myth walking among mortals, sorrow made sacred, desire made untouchable, beauty transformed into power. Her reflection in the waters below shimmered. Golden eyes, tipped with green, gazed back, fierce, luminous, untouchable. She studied herself, not with fear, not with vanity, but comprehension. She was the sum of all she had been and become, the tension between longing and isolation distilled into form. The serpents flickered, tongues tasting the air, coiling to mirror her breath. Protection and reflection, mirrors of her soul's complexity. She thought of those who would come to see her, legend and warning, caution and awe, remembered and feared. Her solitude would not diminish her power. In the stillness, she was complete. She did not yearn for worship, praise, or redemption. She needed nothing beyond the awareness of her own existence.
the quiet acknowledgement that she had endured, survived, transformed. Her gaze drifted outward, scanning the horizon where ocean kissed sky. The wind carried faint echoes of Poseidon, whispers of Athena, distant cries of mortals frozen by myth. In those echoes she found resonance, not pain. Her story had become larger than herself, a lesson etched into stone and wave, into heart and memory, into fear and admiration. Time would pass. Mortals would forget details, embellish truths, shape legends as they lived. But she would endure. Her gaze, her presence, her myth, all would persist beyond fleeting life, beyond fading devotion, beyond mortal comprehension. She was eternal, sorrow incarnate, beauty transformed. She was the echo of what had been and the promise of what could never die.
She paused, letting the wind swirl around her serpents, the sea breathe beneath her feet. The moon hung low, casting silver light across scales and stone, illuminating power and grace intertwined. She inhaled, air heavy with brine and memory, and exhaled, releasing centuries of longing. Her voice, soft and low, rose once more, not for mortals, not for gods, but for herself. I am here. I endure. I am remembered, not as I was, but as I am. And that is enough. The serpents shifted, tongues brushing her cheeks like kisses of remembrance. They whispered in hisses only she could hear, melodies of eternity, comfort and companionship intertwined. In that sound, Medusa found the last remnants of what she had lost, not hope, not innocence, but serenity, born of understanding, acceptance, transcendence. The ocean responded with a subtle swell, the wind carrying a faint echo across cliffs, forests, and villages. Stones shimmered in silver light, carrying her presence, her power, her legend. Even the stars paused, reflecting in her golden eyes. Her lament was not sorrow alone. It was the record of transformation, the testament to what beauty and desire, punishment and love could forge. She was curse and blessing, agony and grace, mortal memory and immortal myth. The world would remember, fear, revere, and whisper her name. She lowered her gaze, meeting her reflection. Serpents coiled in slow harmony. She smiled faintly, not with joy, not with triumph, but serene comprehension. Beyond judgment, longing, beyond gods or mortals, she existed as legend, myth, embodiment of sorrow transformed into power. And in that stillness, she finally rested. Her gaze, even upon ocean and cliffs, shaped eternity, a quiet, haunting, sensual echo, alive in hearts who would never see her, yet always remember. Medusa's voice faded into silence, carried on wind and water. Cliffs held their breath. The sea trembled lightly. Night deepened. She remained, eternal and whole. In that final stillness, she was beauty, desire, punishment, and transformation made flesh. Sorrow transfigured, exile sanctified, legend incarnate. As moonlight touched her scales, shimmering across golden eyes that had once been mortal, the world knew Medusa endured, and in her endurance she was divine.